Hey folks, welcome to Roll of Law. Today I want to talk about how Quebec may end up putting all of their friendly local game stores out of business. Now the issue here is that Quebec is historically a French culture and they have the French language and they have laws protecting the French language to try to ensure its prominence. And I recognize there's some irony that this video is originally recorded in English, but these laws end up causing some problems when you start applying them to sort of geek pursuits. Let's have a look at the law. So it says every inscription on a product, on its container, or on its wrapping, or on a document or object supplied with it, including the directions for use and the warranty certificates, must be drafted in French. This rule applies also to menus and wine lists. The French inscription may be accompanied with a translation or translations, but no inscription in another language may be given greater prominence than that in French or be available on more favorable terms. So that's our first section, and already if you're a bit of a geek or a gamer, and you probably are if you're watching this channel, you're probably already seeing issues, because I will show you an example of a board game I really like, and that is detriment. It's in German, and it's referring to the boat, like the kind of boat which in English is called a junk. Now, so far as I know, this has only ever been printed in German. There is no English translation that I'm aware of, and no French translation other than fan translations. And so if you find a used copy of this for sale, typically it'll have like an English rule sheet sort of tucked into it that was printed off the internet. But this is something that is sort of well known to board gamers. There's a lot of games out there that just have only ever been printed in one language and never get reprinted. Some of them are easier to translate than others because some of them have a lot of text, but a game like this doesn't really. It's got cards with pictures on it. So long as you can figure out the rules, you're good to go. And that's getting even easier and easier all the time. Things like Google Lens and so forth allow for sort of real-time translation of a manual. You just kind of point your phone at it and it'll show you what the manual means. Cool. Fantastic. But the law says that you cannot sell this in Quebec. If you had a copy of this, you wouldn't be able to sell it, which is a bit of a problem. It gets even more difficult when you think of things like, well, this is a role-playing game, Mothership. It is science fiction horror. It's a good game. There might be a French translation that comes out at some point, but right now, there's just the English. And somebody might actually prefer the English. There are still Anglophones in Quebec. But until a French version comes out, it becomes very difficult to sell this because every inscription on a product, on its container or wrapping, well, there's not a whole lot of that on this, at least. You know, it says deluxe set and player's survival guide and so forth. Okay, you could translate those, I guess. But also the directions for use. Well, it's a role-playing game. It's a tabletop role-playing game. The whole thing is directions for use. So you'd have to translate the entirety of this thing. Now, first of all, your friendly local game store doesn't have the resources to do that. They just can't. You know, there's thousands of words in here. But second, they don't have the legal ability to do that because that would be creating a derivative work. And copyright law says that the only people who get to create derivative works are the original copyright owners or anybody who's given a license. So if they actually did go and translate the whole thing, they'd be in violation of the law. But also the law notes that it has to be drafted in French. It's not clear. It seems to me that this actually says that you can't just include a translation because then the English version would have greater prominence. Okay, so it goes on. We get other sort of issues there. Regardless of the medium used, catalogs, brochures, folders, commercial directories, order forms, and any other documents of the same nature that are available to the public must be drawn up in French. All computer software, including game software and operating systems, whether installed or uninstalled, must be available in French unless no French version exists. Okay. But we also get section 54 here, toys and games, and they'd probably consider this to be a game, right? It's a role-playing game. And they would definitely consider this to be a game. So toys and games, except those referred to in section 52.1, so except things that are computer games, which require the use of a non-French vocabulary for their operation, are prohibited on the Quebec market unless a French version of the toy or game is available on the Quebec market on no less favorable terms. Well, that could be very difficult. I don't know what exactly or where they draw the line on that. For instance, would Cards Against Humanity count there? Apples to Apples? I don't know if French translations of those exist, but it might be very difficult. The other thing that becomes a problem here is that the board game market is very small and profit margins are tiny, razor thin. A lot of board games are made, they're very well reviewed, people love them, and they end up losing money and not enough people buy them and they never get a second printing. And all of those games, and there's tons of them out there and people collect them and they value them quite highly. All of those games, well, if they're never going to see a second printing, then they're certainly never going to see, for instance, a French printing if the original printing was in English. So it's going to be very, very difficult, and a lot of products just simply won't be able to exist. So, for instance, if Mothership is doing real well, they're selling really well, they are thinking of doing a French, French printing. So the French printing would be available. Great. But there's all sorts of games that I own and play and so forth that have not been that successful and may never see a French printing. The other issue that comes up is if you start talking about, for instance, collectible card games, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, all sorts of things. Now, a lot of these do have a French version, but the French version is considered substantially less attractive to collectors, to all sorts of people. And so if the English version is not available, even French speakers may prefer the English version just for those characteristics. But further, when you start dealing with these games in a competitive sense, for instance, Magic the Gathering, they have tournaments where there's big money on these tournaments. They need an official rule set. And so the official rule set is almost certainly going to be the one that's in English because these games are printed mostly in the United States. And so here we run into our issues again of you can't have, more or less or favorable terms, but you also end up with no inscription in another language may be given greater prominence than that in French or be available on more favorable terms. I wonder, would they consider it to be of greater prominence or more favorable terms if they give you a French manual, but the English manual is the one that actually determines tournament play? All of these are big questions, but the problem that will come up is if you are a board game store and so forth, most of the games on the market do not have a French version, and they're just not one available. And the board game stores cannot legally translate. And they'd have to open up every single copy in order to put in a translation if they could. So there is a possibility for the government to put in exceptions, and the exceptions are governed by section 54.1. It says the government may, by regulation and on the conditions it fixes, provide for exceptions to the application of sections 51 to 54. So the government can say, listen, this is a particular niche that maybe we can't apply this to. And there's various sorts of places where they can do that. And so this is something that currently the board game establishments within Quebec are trying to push for. And if you are within Quebec, I would encourage you to consider writing your provincial government and asking them to include board games, tabletop games, role-playing games, games like Warhammer, games like Magic the Gathering within an exception. And the reason why is that this will not hurt the games themselves. Like, if you are the manufacturer of a board game, it's not going to slow you down. And it won't hurt sales of these things, really, because people will just buy them online from stores that are not located within Quebec and not within Quebec's jurisdiction. And Quebec isn't about to start opening every package that goes to a Quebec resident to make sure that they don't get a forbidden English product. What it will do is it'll put your local game store out of business. The places where gamers like to go to play games or to, have community, all of that will end up just moving to online forums and people will meet up in various other places. But this is an unfortunate outcome. So please, if you are within Quebec, I encourage you to write your government, ideally en français, if you can. If you're outside of Quebec, probably don't bother. I don't think they're going to listen to you if you're, an Anglophone like me who doesn't live in Quebec. But I hope that this can be turned around because there's a lot of good people out there who've been running these businesses who stand to lose everything if this law starts being enforced. And word is that enforcement is picking up. So anyway, I had some questions about that because the news broke a little while ago. And so I thought I'd talk about the law around it and also just hopefully encourage people to action. If this gets changed, that would be a good thing. So thank you for watching and see you next time.